What's the most outrageous Hitman assassination anime manga you've ever watched or read? Well, I'm here to tell you that it's definitely Sakamoto Days. And if you didn't say Sakamoto Days, then this episode is for you.
Pardon a little bit of the congestion. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Mel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Mel, the host of this channel. And this may be purely coincidental because there is some news buzzing around in regards to a potential anime adaptation for Sakamoto Days, but we're not going to get to that till the end. Today, we're going to talk about Sakamoto Days in general, all the fantastic things about Sakamoto Days, what makes it so outrageous to read, and if you haven't picked it up yet, all the reasons as to why you should be picking it up. It is by the grace of Free Comic Book Day that I was able to discover Sakamoto Days. And from there on out, I was able to read it weekly in the Manga Plus app. As you know, it is my main reading app if you watched some of my previous videos. And if you've never heard of Sakamoto Days before and are currently not reading the manga, here's a quick synopsis. Sakamoto Days is about a 27-year-old man who has since retired from being a hitman. He has gotten married, settled down, has a kid, and he's a little bit out of shape. He's a little fluffy and lovable. But one day there's a bounty placed on his head, which kind of prompts him to pseudo come out of retirement, except for the fact that the family rules of the Sakamoto family indicate that Sakamoto himself, Sakamoto Taro, full name, is not allowed to kill anybody. And because of that, when assassins come for him due to the bounty on his head, he can only but immobilize them or find a way to defeat them without killing them. And at first, the story starts off as very random because Sakamoto just ends up in very weird events that happen to have either assassinations or an active crime that's happening, and he has to go out of his way in a disguised manner to prevent these things from happening. It is not up until, I want to say chapter 10, that the plot of the story kind of kicks off, and that's what I mentioned earlier, where a bounty is placed on Sakamoto's head, and in order to keep his family safe, he now needs to discover who is this person that placed a bounty on his head, and he needs to take them out without killing them. It sounds simple enough, and it sounds standard enough that you may have heard a story like this before. But here are some reasons as to why Sakamoto Days is quite possibly one of my favorite Hitman manga potential anime that I have ever seen. And first things first are the characters. The characters are so quirky. Starting with our main character, Sakamoto Taro. He's, again, as I mentioned, a 27-year-old retired assassin slash hitman, and he's kind of out of shape. But the most quirky aspects about him are that he can literally use anything as a weapon. And we'll get into that later. And the fact that he looks completely out of shape, but actually is not. He could still throw it down and is quite possibly one of the physically strongest characters in Sakamoto Days, maybe aside from Takamura. And as much as I'd like to mention Takamura, all I can say is that he's a real badass old man that maybe should have retired a long time ago, doesn't really speak words, and there's some huge enigma to him because the man can literally cut anything. How is he so strong? But back to our main character. Sakamoto is also really shy and reserved. So in the first few chapters, he doesn't really talk much or at all. And they introduce our now secondary character, Asakura Shin, who is a telepath. He's clairvoyant. And a lot of the dialogue that you see between Shin and Sakamoto is Shin reading all of Sakamoto's thoughts. Shin is quite possibly one of our most grounded characters, and the only thing really quirky about him is the fact that he's clairvoyant and can read minds. Shin is also a hitman, but now ex-hitman, when he decides to start working at Sakamoto's convenience store, which I may have neglected to mention when I said that he retired from being a hitman. But Shin and Sakamoto's relationship is wholesome, but also funny because Shin has this strong admiration for him, and I think Sakamoto is aware of it. But the thoughts that Sakamoto often thinks about Shin are what adds to like the comedic aspects of their relationship. Another character that ends up working at Sakamoto's convenience store is Shoutout, who is an ex-triad from China. And they stumble upon her one day running away, I guess, from like members who were trying to assassinate her. And there we discover that while not an assassin, former member of Triad, has a very distinct fighting style. Something you may be familiar with, and that's a drunken fists fighting style. Very reminiscent of like Rock Lee and other movies, like Drunken Master. And then our last member, but not last character that ends up joining Sakamoto's team and working at his convenience store is Mashimo Hisuke. He is first introduced because he is trying to kill Sakamoto due to the bounty on his head. But we find out that one, he's extremely gullible. Two, he kind of failed to qualify to join the JAA, which is the Japanese Association of Assassins, but he's extremely wicked with a rifle. And unfortunately, the only weapon that he can use is a rifle. When you're an assassin, and as you read the story, you have to be able to master many ways in how to kill someone. But what's so cool about Hisuke and his use of a rifle, he is an expert at ricocheting the bullets. And he uses a bird to scope out his targets. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some other quirky characters like Takamura. Very quiet, almost silent, mumbling old man that can cut anything with a sword. No one knows how long he's been an assassin for. The man looks ancient, but he's still throwing it down. Asaragi, who is a member of the JAA, but the special team called the Order, is very aloof, kind of carefree, often gets lost. Actually, I don't know if she gets lost or she just wanders off, and then her mentor, Shishiba, always loses track of her. But when it comes to showtime, she goes really hard, like so hard that she uses a rotating chainsaw, not a rotating chainsaw, but you know those rotating like saw blades, you know, that you use to like cut wood and stuff like that? Yeah, that's what she uses as her assassination weapon of choice. So as you can see, Sakamoto Days is full of like odd, quirky characters, whether it's their personalities, whether it's their means of how they kill people. The characters themselves will draw you in. And moving on to our next point, as I've mentioned quite a bit, the means in which some of the assassins choose to like kill people or to like fight is like also really quirky. So as I mentioned, Sakamoto himself can use literally quite anything. Here are some random items that he uses in the first couple of chapters to either fight or, you know, combat with. Cough drop, wooden skewers, kitchen tongs, pots and pans, his apron, kinda, because it's bulletproof, a street sign, a pen, and you know, there's so much more that it's not gonna all come back to me. And this is just from what I've seen Sakamoto use. As I mentioned, Osaragi uses a rotating saw blade. Shishiba uses a hammer. That's basically his weapon of choice. There's some dude who uses a ball and sports rules to kill his victims. Like, for example, if it was the game of volleyball, he'd have this ball, I think it's got some weight to it, he would spike the ball and then target his victims with it in hopes of killing them. And his whole, do I want to say mission in life? Not mission in life, but his whole like way of killing is exclusively surrounded by the rules of sports. So the manga basically takes the concept of assassinating someone with regular tools like swords and guns, and they just scale it and they make it one of the most creative ways you could kill somebody. Like if there was a show called like 1,000 Ways to Kill Someone, Sakamoto Days kind of like serves you up all the different ways you never thought of. But I highly doubt there'd ever be a show like that. That would be kind of concerning, right? And as you can insinuate just by the fact that this is an ex-hitman assassin type of manga, there's a lot of action. But our mangaka, Suzuki Sensei, is one of the most masterful mangaka that I've seen draw action. Because the action that he draws is so simplistic in like paneling composition, so that you can clearly see like what's happening in each and every scene. And if I were to ever say like, you know, have I read a manga where I could see like the action leaping off the page to the point that I low-key don't need an anime, that would be Sakamoto Days, probably in addition to Dan Da Dan. But Sakamoto Days is definitely like one of the best out there in translating action through drawing. And this came through realization, one, through the interview that Shonen Jump or Manga Plus did with Suzuki Sensei's editor, the editor for Sakamoto Days, and also through a conversation that I had on Threads with Odessa Mose. So shout out to Odessa Mose for pointing out to me just how there really isn't a manga out there that translates action like Suzuki Sensei does in Sakamoto Days. And sometimes that's what puts people off from reading manga. It's the fact that when you read, it's sometimes very confusing to dictate what some of the action sequences are. And if that's something that's been a concern for you for any action manga or Sakamoto Days specifically, I can definitely ensure to you that you will be able to understand every single motion and action taken within the manga of Sakamoto Days. And when this gets animated, because it sounds like we're well on our way to an animation, it's quite possibly going to be some of the most creative action sequences that I think anyone's ever seen. And I'm going to plug in the description below a link to the interview with the editor from Sakamoto Days, because he kind of describes how Suzuki Sensei is very mindful of his paneling, very mindful of how he can depict actions to his readers, and just the level of expertise and study he's done around drawing the human body. And just building off the way that the manga looks, the style of it, how clean it is, and how simple it is to follow along with the action scenes. Sakamoto Days has this really interesting style. If you started like reading or watching in the 2010s or 2020s, you'll see that while the art is unique depending on the mangaka, things have like a modern look in contrast to anime from the 80s and the 90s. Sakamoto Days really takes this older 90s style type of art. It makes the manga a little bit more unique for its place in time and a lot more captivating for perhaps some readers. I think it was a really interesting stylistic choice for going with a 90s type of art style, which will be very new and appealing to people who are newer to manga and anime, but very nostalgic for people who grew up watching anime in the 80s and the 90s. I, for one, lean on the nostalgic side, so when I first saw the art style, I was like, wow, I haven't seen anything like this in a long time. And it almost gives the story a cooler edge, aside from all of the insane, intricate action that you see within Sakamoto Days. And since some of the material can be a little bit heavy with all of the intense action, people getting killed at some points, and the fact that Sakamoto is basically fending for his life out here, the mangaka made it a point to balance the story with a lot of comedy. As you can tell already watching this video, Sakamoto Days is humorous just one in the fact that our main character is a little bit fluffy, he's a little bit, cuddly, and looks very out of shape, but it's the fact that he's incredibly agile, incredibly strong, can throw hands and feet in flip-flops, and has been shown to immobilize people with the most random everyday objects. And some of the stuff that I may say from this point until the end of the video could be spoilers, so I'll create a timestamp if you want to skip ahead and avoid some of what I'm about to say. So some really funny, interesting elements of Sakamoto Days is one, Sakamoto, as I mentioned, is a little bit on the fluffier side. When he goes real hard and he starts fighting, he often loses the weight, becomes real thin. I'm talking about like his premarital days before he had a kid and settled down and retired. But then he instantly gains all the weight back the next day. The first time I saw that, I had to flip back and forth between the pages because I thought they were completely two different people. But they make it a point in the first chapter to show you how Sakamoto used to look like during his assassination days and what he looks like now. So you could kind of draw right away that this is Sakamoto, but if you don't remember, like from the very first panel of the whole entire manga, then you're kind of going to be like, who is this person? Where did they come from? And the next comedic element that we were almost immediately introduced to in chapter 1 is Shin is seeking out Sakamoto. And in seeking him out, he's kind of tasked with assassinating him. Obviously, Sakamoto immediately demobilizes him, recruits him into working at the store, but oftentimes when he gets really frustrated with Shin, our clairvoyant and mind reader, he always imagines killing Shin in his mind. And obviously the running joke is that only Shin knows, because no one else knows what's going on in Sakamoto's head but him. Shoutout Lu is also a very comedic element that they introduce into the storyline because she will fight and she has the skills, but when things get very intense, she drinks a bunch of sake, she gets drunk, and she goes hard. But the funny thing about that is that when she's drunk and using her drunken fist style, she also goes through a spectrum of emotions. Like we're talking about crying drunk, happy drunk, angry drunk. So she's quite an enigma to deal with if you're fighting her. So you can look forward to a lot of humor from all of our characters, side characters, main characters, supporting characters, in the story of Sakamoto Days, because there are times in which the material gets kind of heavy. But now that we've reached kind of the end of this video and I've given you all the reasons as to why you should be reading Sakamoto Days, especially before it gets animated, I want to thank Life with Anime Podcast for suggesting this topic. It's been on my mind for quite a little bit. I honestly don't know why I was putting off doing a video like this, but you know what? We've done it, we're here, and I'd like to thank them for putting it at the top of my mind. Additionally, if you've seen the rumors and some confirmations around Netflix licensing the animation for Sakamoto Days, please know that it's just a licensing. That kind of means that they've acquired the ability and the rights to stream it, but technically we don't know who's animating it yet. It says that they licensed it for 2024, but there's some ambiguity as to whether it will be released this year or not, because you know what, we're already halfway through the year. And from my perspective, if something's going to be released in the next 6 months, there would already be some decent promotion or small promotion around Sakamoto Days, considering its popularity in Shonen Jump and on the Manga Plus app. So for now, you can be excited about the aspect that Sakamoto Days is getting an animation, but please try to contain any potential rumors without sourcing to prevent any type of unnecessary stir, either unnecessarily high expectations or potentially unnecessarily low expectations, because sometimes Netflix doesn't have the greatest reputation when it comes to anime. I'm just saying. So there are people that are very concerned, and then there are people who are understanding because they know that a licensing is not the same as an animation. But all that aside, please check out the link in the description before regarding the interview that Manga Plus or Shonen Jump did with the editor of Sakamoto Days. It does explain a lot of Suzuki Sensei's expertise around the art style within Sakamoto Days, his conscious thought in the planning that goes into Sakamoto Days, as well as his inspirations for, or their inspirations, I don't know if Suzuki is he, she, or they, inspirations for creating Sakamoto Days, which interestingly enough is the same inspiration or a similar inspiration for Kagurabachi. Suzuki Sensei really likes the assassin hitman type of foreign film, and it is specifically called out that Sakamoto Days was inspired by the likes of John Wick and The Equalizer. And I've seen tons of people on like Reddit and within the comments of the Manga Plus app just saying how Sakamoto Days feels like a John Wick, but with a lot of comedy, just based on how outrageous and creative some of the action sequences are within the manga. All that aside, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you will read Sakamoto Days. If you are already reading Sakamoto Days, let me know if there's anything that I missed as to reasonings of why people should pick up Sakamoto Days. Or let me know down in the comments below why you picked up Sakamoto Days and why you're continuing to read it and why you enjoy it. And if you want to talk about Sakamoto Days with me, you can find me on Instagram or Threads. I'm on there quite a bit, and I just love engaging with others who are reading similar manga or watching similar anime or the same anime and manga that I am. You can find links to my social in the description below as well. Thank you for joining. This has been another episode of Animel. I am your host, Mel, and I will catch you all on the next one. Bye!